Evidence before the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance. Now let us assume a country with a currency of a certain amount of gold in circulation, supplemented by notes in circulation, that is one proposal, I understand, in regard to the point to which you are leading up. Yes, in a certain way. And on the other hand, a currency based upon a gold exchange standard. Will you expand your recommendation by helping the Commission on this point? Why this possibility of what is really inflation is more impossible when you have gold in circulation than when you have a pure exchange standard? It is this: the fact that you have the liability of converting your paper currency into gold under a gold currency with paper in circulation is a means whereby the paper currency is kept within limits. You cannot add more paper currency to your circulation than what your reserves for convertibility would permit. But where, under the gold exchange standard, as we have had in India, there is no liability upon you to convert your circulating media into gold, you are free to issue as much as you like. Supposing I start with the supposition that you were to accept an obligation to convert your internal currency under the exchange standard into gold or the equivalent of gold in a foreign currency, would that, in your opinion, put the two systems in the same position as regards their capacity for resisting inflation? It depends upon what kind of convertibility you adopt. I am supposing the acceptance by the currency authority, whatever it was, of a legal obligation to convert the internal currency on presentation into gold or the means of obtaining gold in a foreign currency in a gold standard country. If your obligation is to accept to pay gold or tender without question, then I think that would be sufficient. If I may say so, I mean that convertibility is like conscience and it might be of various degrees, and its efficacy to control the volume of currency would depend upon what kind of convertibility you have. If your convertibility is only for the purpose of foreign exchange, then my submission is that would not be a sufficient limitation on the issue of currency. If the obligation is such as that to which you have just referred, an obligation to convert the internal currency into a means of international payment, either gold or foreign currencies based on gold, why, in your opinion, is that not an adequate means of preventing this danger of the inflation of currency with which we are dealing? Because a foreign exchange is not necessarily an indication of internal inflation. For instance, in our own experience in India, it has been found out that, and it has been found out, I think, by Professor Keynes, that although the rupee remained at the ratio of 1 shilling to $4 for a long time, the level of prices in India and the level of prices in England are very different. Exchange cannot be said to be in a complete harmony with the whole of the price level of a country. Exchange affects only such things as enter into international trade, and everything would really depend upon what is the volume and what is the ratio of the goods that enter into international trade and goods that did not enter. If the country is so situated that its internal trade is much larger than its external trade, in fact, if its external trade is insignificant, what do you mean by the internal trade being larger than its external trade? I mean that all the goods or all the transactions of a country are not meant for the purpose of foreign trade. In fact, a country may have very little foreign trade, and consequently, the valuation of goods that enter into foreign trade may not affect the valuation of goods that do not enter. The relation between them may not be very close. Let me generalize the question somewhat and put it in this way: whether you have a gold standard with notes and gold in circulation, or whether you have an exchange standard by which the internal currency is converted into external, is not the volume of internal currency in both cases controlled by the preservation of a certain ratio between the reserves and the internal token currency outstanding? And is it any easier to ensure the maintenance of that due relation in the one case than in the other? I have been thinking more of prices rather than of exchange ratios. I quite admit that the exchange ratio between two currencies might offer and might remain the same, and yet the internal prices levels in the two countries may differ. Which two countries? Any two countries. Take for instance England and India. The ratio between gold and the rupee or sterling, and the rupee taking the sterling as equivalent to gold, may remain the same. In fact, it did remain the same for quite some time, but taking into consideration the price level in the two countries, they did differ. Although I admit that after some time the internal price level will assert itself and bring the foreign exchange ratio in line with itself. I think you are going a little in advance of the actual point with which I was dealing with in my question, although no doubt you are referring to matters which are very relevant. Now, let me put it from another point of view. As a matter of fact, if we consider countries in which there has been a currency system more approximate to that which you recommended than India has ever seen, have those countries, under the stress of necessity, ever felt the slightest difficulty in inflating when they felt the need to do so? Let me instance what occurred in gold standard countries in the war. No, as I say, gold itself may be subject to inflation. It was, as we found in America itself, subject to inflation on account of the enormous quantity of gold in circulation then. Might I put it in this way, that convertibility for the purposes of foreign exchange is insufficient? That is the point I am driving at. Convertibility, if it is to be an effective convertibility, must be convertibility without question. It must be convertibility for all purposes, although if I must just say so I am not in favor of a convertible currency, as you will see from my memorandum. The end.